Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second Sunday of Epiphany, which follows Christmastide, and it lasts 7 weeks, ending with Transfiguration Sunday. Now, Epiphany is a season of revelation and understanding, particularly about the identity and nature of Christ. Now, if you've ever struggled through a question or doubt or confusion about an idea or situation, and then all of a sudden the answer appears in your mind, like a light bulb going on in your brain, you've had a small epiphany. And now Christ is the manifestation of God to humans, and Epiphany recognizes and explores this truth for a 7-week season. Now today we divert out of Matthew and into John chapter 1. The wisdom of the liturgical calendar actually brings us here for something unique for Epiphany, so I think it's valuable to get our bearings for what's going on in this passage. Now the passage has 3 sections. In the first section, Jesus is out in the desert hanging out with John the Baptist. And John has a pretty large following of disciples. Now John sees Jesus walking toward him and he has an epiphany. Suddenly John knows that this Jesus guy is the promised Messiah and just says out loud, "That's the guy I've been talking about. This is the reason I've been baptizing folks out here in the desert. I've been waiting for this epiphany or this revelation." Now the second section is almost like a repeat of the first. Jesus is walking by John and then 2 of John's disciples, one identified as Andrew. Jesus asks them, "Hey, what do you want?" And the disciples respond, "We want to know where you're staying." To which Jesus says, "Come and see." And then they hung out there for the day, and then Andrew went and got his brother Peter, who was actually Simon until this very moment. And Jesus sees him coming and gives him the name Peter. And then he's going to play a big role going forward. Now the last section is the call of Philip and Nathanael, where Nathanael says, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Talking about Jesus' hometown. And then he finds out, yes. Now an interesting thing to note, John proclaims Jesus to be the Messiah before any miracles happen. Andrew and Peter believe he's the Messiah before anything big happens. And Jesus calls Philip with a simple, "Follow me," and then turns to Nathanael and then he says, "We've found the one that Moses and the prophets wrote about." Right? So these guys somehow have this revelation or epiphany about the nature of Christ in this passage. Now, how is everyone making this call within the first chapter of the book? I mean, the other gospels keep it secret for a long period of time. And then when it comes out, Jesus is adamant about it remaining a secret. In John, the epiphany happens right off the bat and is announced with full fanfare. What's going on here? We don't have to synthesize all the stories into one historically accurate, cohesive narrative. That's not what's going on here. We don't have to force the text into theological boxes that we made for it. And instead, we can let it be what it is and ask questions of the writer's intent and their message, which is what we're going to be doing going forward today. Now, John is a very deep and creative writer who weaves multiple layers of meaning on top of a single narrative. And that makes him fun to study, but very difficult to read and understand. So we're going to dive in and see what we see. Hang on to your hats. We think about time probably about as much as a fish thinks about water, right? It just kind of governs the flow of our life without us thinking about it. But time is based on how long the earth revolves around the sun. And that's 1 year. And then we break that up with sunrises and sunsets. And these are our days, which are 24 hours, because then we break that up into hours, minutes, and seconds and all that. But what happens if Earth slows down in its rotation or orbit, or it fluctuates by wiggling a little bit? Does time change? To most of us, it doesn't really matter if a day fluctuates by a fraction of a second. But scientists who need to measure the precise time of an experiment, they had to divert from what was called solar time and use atomic time, which is the time measured by the bouncing around of electrons back and forth, which doesn't fluctuate. And I don't understand that, but I know that they do it. Now the atomic clock is actually based on that time. So to keep solar time in step with atomic time, we've actually had to add a leap second to our calendar 37 times since 1972. So we've actually gained 37 seconds in our calendar since then. You can see how over a long period of time, this can actually affect things about what time it is. Now, time is a big concept in the book of John. And just as we have atomic time and solar time with which we measure our days, They had two types of time as well. They had chronos and kairos. You notice that our passage begins with a timestamp, the next day. And the section after that has a timestamp of, it was about 4 o'clock. And then the next one has another timestamp saying, oh, and the next day. This is what is called chronos time in the Bible, which we know as chronological passing, what we know as seconds and minutes and hours and all that. Now, kairos time is something different. It's the opportunity. It's a season. It's an intersection, a moment of truth, a defining moment, the moment that changes or alters our life forever, right? Kairos is the quality of the time that happens within the chronos minute. And John is a story of these two intersecting times crossing lines in the person and story of Jesus, who was recognized first by John the Baptist. Now, Genesis and John share the same opening line, in the beginning, which means in the origins. And I always thought beginning was like this spot on the timeline where everything begins and starts, and everything before that was nothing. Origins is more like a source or a spring which supplies water to a well. So it's not necessarily the beginning of the well, it's the source of the well. So what if origins was not merely the starting second, but more of a location, the eternal spring from which all time flows and returns to? Out of the eternal origins of God's dwelling bursts forth temporal reality for all finite beings to dwell within and interact in this relationship with an infinite God. God initiated from eternity our earthly time, and the two were married together in unity in the beginning. Earthly time, eternal time. And then the fall happens, the story of Adam and Eve, and then there's this divorce of heaven and earth. A divorce of eternity with chronos, earthly time, and Adam and Eve are exiled from the garden of paradise presence. Now this story tells us that it's not just a divorce of humans from God's presence, but of heaven from earth itself, of eternity with time. John represents someone who is awake. John is not merely caught up in the flow of earthly time, you know, the to-do lists and deadlines and all that kind of stuff. John actually stands within these forms of time, but has an eye out for the action of God, the breaking in of the moment, the opportune time to be seized. And he sees it before anyone else. What if we weren't so addicted to filling every second of our day with productivity or distraction? What if we could live within the flow of time, with an eye on what is appropriate for this moment? You know, rest or work, speech or silence, action or rest. You might miss your moment if you're too busy for it. You're too distracted. But grace brings round opportunity again. But will we be awake to see it today? I was in the store last week to buy some things for the holiday, and I was purchasing an item that required me to be of age, that is 21. And I'm 44, so I'm well beyond the 21 years old marker, right? But in Michigan, you have to look over 50 to not be carded. And the young man who was doing the checkout looked at my item, then he looked at me, and then he just hit the button. Yep, looks over 50. And I'm slightly put off a little bit because I'm only 44. Now maybe it's the gray in the beard that made me look over 50. Maybe it's just obvious that I am not under 21. Because I'm actually closer to 66 years old than 21 at this point in my life. So I'm at peace with being the not so young guy any longer. I'm cool with that. Now in our passage today, Jesus offers his first words in the gospel. I'm sure John really thought long and hard about what line he's going to put here, right? Because first impressions matter. You get one shot, right? So two disciples start following Jesus around, and a common practice that this was for potential students to kind of follow around a rabbi. But it was also backwards from the other gospels where Jesus goes and seeks out his disciples. And so Jesus turns and says his first words, "What do you want?" Okay, kind of seems obvious, doesn't it? You know, potential students on the heels of a rabbi who has just been declared the Messiah. But Jesus knows this. The question was not for him to gain an understanding of their intent. The question was for them to reflect upon. So, have you ever thought about this question? It ends up being a lot more complicated than it first appears, because often our wants are contradictory. I want to be loved and known, but I don't want to be vulnerable because that's scary. I want to lose weight and be healthy, but I want the leftover cake in the fridge. I'm rich, but I want to be left alone at the same time. I want the freedom to do what I want to do, but I want structure to guide me in my decisions. I want to live in a new and interesting place, but I want roots. I want family. So knowing what you want is really difficult when you sit down and think about it, because getting one thing will actually naturally cancel out all the other things that you might also want. But I still think it's important to ask the question and reflect upon it. Maybe the most important one we could ask ourselves. What if you could drill down beneath the surface desires for comfort and pleasure and power to maintain it all? And what would you see? What would you find? Maybe these disciples want fame and power. That's going to accompany them being a disciple of the Messiah. They can only see glory and not the accompanying difficulty, hardship, persecution, alienation, and eventual martyrdom. So this question is really important. But their answer is just a question. Where are you staying? And Jesus says, come and see. Now, established here is a major theme in John's gospel, seeking Jesus and then abiding with Jesus. We see right away that what John's intention is here. John says that a disciple is one who seeks Jesus and then abides with Jesus. Now, to seek God is not to seek answers to questions, but to ask the question, what do I desire? What do I want? And to abide with God is not to have obtained the answer, but to live within that question as a guiding compass. To continually ask ourselves these questions. Is this what I want? Is this greater than all the other wants that it's going to displace? Will it bring about me abiding within the love that is God? This is what following Jesus is supposed to look like. This type of interaction with our own life that keeps our desire clear and ever before our eyes. Now, some years back, I was on a bike trip with a church youth group, and they would cycle 75 to 100 miles a day for 14 days. And yes, it was just as much fun as it sounds. I'll leave that up to you for interpretation. So I navigated. There was like this snack crew and the navigator, and they would all travel together. And then they would set up rest stations of water and snacks to keep the riders fueled up for the long journeys. So the 25 riders all pull up into the first snack stop, and everybody's eating peanut butter sandwiches. But I could tell they were like wrapped around something, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I discovered it was a pickle. Yes, so they were eating peanut butter and pickle sandwiches. And my thought was, ew, gross. And I said that out loud. But they all said, don't knock it till you try it. So I mustered up some courage and I tried the peanut butter pickle sandwich. And lo and behold, I really liked it. Something about the sweet, sour, salty, creamy combo that really just worked. And every now and then, I still get a craving for a peanut butter pickle sandwich, and I eat one. Now, there's many things that are worth prejudging. We do it all the time. I don't try on every piece of clothing in the store. I'm drawn to some and not to others because I have a certain preference and style. It's already established. I don't watch every movie that's out there because I know what kind of movies I'll enjoy and what ones that I'm going to have to make a call and not invest in time to watch that one. And most of the time I'm right, but sometimes I'm wrong. And then I enjoy something I thought I wouldn't. Or I'm surprised by something I thought I would not like, but enjoyed, like a peanut butter pickle sandwich. Now, to walk the line of making judgment calls about things and letting yourself be surprised by something new is really difficult. Now, the interesting thing is that Jesus has not really done anything yet, or barely even said anything, and somehow everybody knows that this is the Messiah. The miracles are going to start in chapter 2, right? What's happened is John the Baptist pointed at him and said, that's the guy. And then Nathanael hears from Philip that they found the Messiah and he's from Nazareth. And then Philip prejudges the moment and says, wait, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Now this prejudgment almost caused Nathanael to miss the thing that God was doing right in their midst. But he was gently invited, come and see. Now when we're caught in a prejudgment loop, this invitation can be very helpful. Oh, you're one of those people. I don't like those people. Well, come and see, right? When life says, I want to change this, do this, go there, you know, with change and opportunity, and then your reaction is to clench up and resist and don't want to, as a result of a prejudgment, maybe just stop, unclench your fist, and ask why. Maybe this invitation to come and see is what you need. Don't knock it till you tried it. Maybe this is what God is doing. Maybe not, but you won't know until you come and see for yourself. Now, the come and see invitation is not merely to try everything as the only way to know if you're ever going to like something, but to examine your judgment mechanism itself every now and then. Perhaps you've been wrong about something important and it's time for a change. You know, the thing you needed, the thing you thought you needed was actually holding you back for safety is the very thing that you need to look at. Perhaps you've been right at something that you're too afraid to say anything about, and it's time for action. Following and abiding keeps us awake to the action of God in our midst. And John's brilliant opening captures all of this with depth and grace. And maybe this is your epiphany this year. As Paula Darcy said, God comes to you disguised as your life. And maybe we can become more awake this epiphany season by asking and dwelling within the right questions. Well, hey, thanks for joining me out here in my yard today. A little breezy. I want to put my hood back up because my head's getting cold. But if you liked what you're experiencing here with our online service, we ask that you would just do a couple things to support us. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and on YouTube, and there you get to see all the stuff we're doing and be kind of notified when all these things come out, our online services and stuff. And you can watch past ones too. And if you would like to partner with us financially, that would be a huge help to us, a little small community in a small community seeking to do some hope, help, and healing out in the world. And there is a link at the bottom of your screen. You just type it in up there and you can do a one-time or a recurring. And we would be very appreciative of that support. So this was week number 2 of Epiphany. Next week is week number 3. And we'll check things out and see what Matthew has for us then, because we're going back into Matthew. So we'll see you then. Peace out and have an epiphany. Oh, it's that dog. Suddenly John knows that this is Jesus, that this Jesus is the guy. Almost. Now today we divert our, I'm just gonna start over.